Here this creator is naively conflating two different pieces of imagery. The creator just got finished talking about the importance of context and is now ignoring it.
A couple months ago, I made a video addressing TikTok sweetheart and highly sought after dinner guest Dan McClellan and his claim that Yahweh was defeated in battle. Now, Dan has responded to my critique recently, so this is going to be my rebuttal to him. So the first thing that Dan critiques me on is misrepresenting him. He does this because I said Dan is wrongly associating a defeat of Israel with the defeat of Yahweh. So let's see Dan's response to me on this.
So this is an entirely false accusation. At no point whatsoever did I ever say a defeat of Israel as necessarily a defeat of Adonai. As I have said many times in my social media content and even in print in peer-reviewed publications, they rationalized their military losses based on whatever was rhetorically helpful and exigent. And so usually it had to do with saying Adonai was punishing them or was angry with them.
Okay, so let me play the clip from the original video that caused my comments about this.
According to the concept of divine warfare in ancient Southwest Asia, your battles were not really your own work. They were the work of your patron deities. And so the battle here is not between the coalition of Edom, Israel, and Judah and the Moabites. The battle is between the Moabite patron deity Chemosh and the God of Israel, Adonai. And in this story, the God of Israel loses. The author's clearly not happy about that.
In light of this clip, I do feel I was justified for making my accusation, as Dan sets up a series of logical steps for the viewer to follow, which does display this type of reasoning that I was critiquing. He says, well, in ancient warfare, it wasn't just the armies, it was the gods fighting. Therefore, it wasn't just Israel versus the Moabites, it was Yahweh versus Chemosh. Israel loses, therefore Yahweh loses, which, the writers of 2 Kings weren't happy about, according to Dan. So if Dan admits that the defeat of Israel does not necessarily entail the defeat of Yahweh, great, fine. I feel no need to spend more time on this if we're on the same page about that.
Here this creator is naively conflating two different pieces of imagery associated with the symbolic use of the hand as a reference to possession, to control, to power. So in 2 Kings 18, the idea is the hand of the Assyrians being against the nation of Israel. For your hand to be against someone is to refer to you attacking them, oppressing them, putting pressure on them. And this is a different idiom from something being given into or delivered into somebody's hand. That is a reference to defeat.
So there are some issues in this argument. First, Dan is correct that there is a language of a hand being against someone to mean attacking them. And he is right in that having a different meaning than someone being delivered into your hands or you being delivered into their hands. However, where I think Dan is wrong is to suggest that into your hands or into my hands means something inconsistent with the prophecy being fulfilled in 2 Kings 3. And Dan himself provides the explanation for my position. Let's see what he has to say.
That is a reference to vanquishing, because that concept of something being in someone's hand is a reference to control, to possession, to ownership.
So the reason that into your hands has the meaning of defeat is because of control, possession, ownership. Of course, this all makes sense from a merely symbolic level. If you imagine someone being literally in your hand, that means you control them. You have power over them. They are, in a sense, helpless, so on and so forth. All that makes sense. And there are sections in the Hebrew Bible in which this language is used to express this type of control outside of the context of a military battle. So for instance, in Genesis 9:2, God gives the creatures of the earth into the hand of Adam. In 1 Samuel 24:10, when David comes upon Saul sleeping and has the chance to kill him, David, his men, and Saul all refer to the fact that Saul had been delivered into David's hand, despite the fact that David doesn't kill him. In fact, David says he would not bring his hand against him. So in this, there is the idea that Saul was in David's hand because in that time, David had all the power. He was in control. Saul was helpless, yet Saul was not defeated in that moment. What's funny is that Saul is then delivered into David's hand again in a similar manner. The psalmist says to God in Psalm 31:5, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." The idea is control, and that is why "into your hands" is such a great expression for conveying military military defeat. Now, with all this in mind, let's look at what happened in the case of 2 Kings 3. The Moabites were to be delivered into the hands of the Israelites. The Israelites went through all the land, decimating them, destroying the land until one final city was left. It was surrounded. The king had no escape. He had tried to escape and failed. At that point, the Moabites had been delivered into the hands of the Israelites. The Israelites had control over the Moabites. They were helpless against the Israelites. And I'm not the only person who makes this claim. There are other scholars who recognize this as well, such as Drew Holland, who in Inspiring Philosophy mentions in his response to Dan. But the next critique Dan makes of me is that I note that all of the other uses of the word for wrath coming upon people that's used in 2 Kings 3, that this is used for wrath that comes from Yahweh in all other instances in the Hebrew Bible. So let's see what Dan has to say in regards to that argument.
It is true that all other occurrences of Ketzef as a noun explicitly attribute it to Adonai, but all other occurrences of Ketzef as a noun explicitly attribute it to Adonai. This is the only occurrence where it is not explicitly attributed to Adonai.
So Dan says, well, yeah, all those other sections are explicit and this isn't. Okay, so now we just come back to this it's not explicit argument. It doesn't explicitly say Chemosh's wrath either. In fact, Chemosh is never explicitly mentioned in the text. This is what I mentioned earlier when I said that Dan switches his criteria based on what interpretation is in view. So next, Dan critiques a possible explanation for why Yahweh's wrath might be coming against Israel that I mentioned in my video, which is that it violated the rules of warfare mentioned in Deuteronomy 20. So let's roll the clip for that.
So nothing about the instructions to chop down the Moabites' good trees is in conflict with Deuteronomy 20. This creator just got finished talking about the importance of context and is now ignoring it, because this part of Deuteronomy 20 is divided explicitly in the text into two different sections. The first section talks about what to do when you are battling outside nations. The second section, that includes the injunction on chopping down trees that are used for food, is talking about when you are coming into Canaan to take back over the land from the nations that are residing therein. And so the instruction not to chop down the trees that can be used for food is explicitly so that you have trees to eat from when you are occupying the land.
I think Dan has made a couple of errors here. I think he's mistaken in why the destruction of the trees were prohibited, and I think he is likely wrong in his division of Deuteronomy 20 into two parts. So let's start with that last one first. Does the remarks about not felling trees for food only apply to places that are inside of Canaan? No. Let's look at the text and see why. Let's start at Deuteronomy 20:10 through 14, which is about how to deal with the living things in the cities that have been conquered. The living things are to be allowed to live. But then verse 15 and 16 says, "Thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not cities of the nations here, but in the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes." Okay, so then in verse 17 through 18, those are just about killing the people in Canaan, not letting them live, how they're going to teach you bad things, stuff like that. But then in verse 19, it goes to the next rule about what to do when you besiege a city. So verse 15 and 16 are not divisions in a law code which separates everything before verse 15 as for other nations and everything after that as things that are just for Canaan, which is what Dan is suggesting. Rather, Deuteronomy 20 is giving general rules for warfare, but the regulations for what to do for the people in the cities you conquer is different depending on if you are outside of Canaan or not. So verses 15 through 18 are clarifying remarks which say, hey, that thing I just said about letting them live, that only goes for certain cities. If you look at verse 19, which contains the prohibitions against felling food trees, it says, when you besiege a city for a long time, making war against it in order to take it, you shall not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. You may eat from them, but you shall not cut them down. Are the trees in the field human, that they should be besieged by you? So the reason for not chopping down the trees is not, hey, you need to eat those later. It's this idea of, hey, why should they be destroyed by you? They aren't human. What have they done for you? You don't have the rights over them. That's the rhetoric that's here, which is not the rhetoric that Dan offers. So Dan has made 2 videos responding to me on this, so I will conclude my response to his first video here, and I plan on uploading a response to his second part of the critique of me later. So make sure to follow to not miss out on that.